You ever stare into a campfire long enough and feel like it's staring back? The flames crackle, the light dances, and something ancient stirs just beneath the surface. Like you're not alone, even when you're sure you are. That's the thing about silence in the woods. It's not silent, it's holding its breath. If you've ever camped deep enough off trail to forget your phone exists, then you know the sound I'm talking about. That layered quiet, wind in the trees, an owl somewhere too far to matter, the occasional pop of a twig that shouldn't be snapping when you're the only one around. When the fire starts to die and the shadows push in, you learn fast. The line between peace and panic is razor thin. I used to be the kind of man who chased that quiet. I believed nature was the last honest place left, that people were the real danger, not the woods. I wasn't naive. I was prepared, strong, careful. I had a plan for everything, but plans are made for things that make sense. And what happened in the Smokies that October? It didn't make sense. It still doesn't. I haven't told anyone this story, not in full. I've hinted, danced around it, turned it into a bar tale with the edges sanded down. But the truth makes people shift in their seats and avoid eye contact. So I stopped telling it. Until now. If this already has you leaning forward, hit subscribe. It helps the channel grow and gives me the fuel to keep bringing these true, chilling stories to life. There's more horror in the world than we like to admit, and I think it's time we start telling it. I had a long weekend off work, and the mountains were calling. That old cliché, except for me. It was more like a compulsion. Fall had landed hard in Tennessee, the air sharp with change, the leaves fire-colored and brittle. I was itching to disappear for a few days and reset, so I packed my gear with the quiet confidence of a man who's done this 100 times. Tent, MRES, first aid, my old Jetboil, that beaten-up AM/FM radio. I pretend I don't care about losing but would panic if I did. My headlamp, backup batteries, my knife, always the knife. I headed toward a clearing I'd found back in spring. A spot you won't find on any ranger map. You have to know where to turn off the gravel and follow an overgrown ATV trail for a good mile. The kind of place that's too isolated for the weekend crowd, but not remote enough to scare off someone like me. I arrived late afternoon, killed the engine and sat in the stillness for a minute, listening. The only sound was the distant scolding of a blue jay and the ticking of my cooling engine. The trees stretched tall and heavy with gold and orange, the shadows already stretching long. I got to work. Tent first, tight rainfly, food hung high. Fire ring cleared and rebuilt with care. Staged my gear in its usual order. Bourbon in the cooler, chair by the ring. I set up the radio and tuned it until blues bled through static, the perfect background for fire prep. By sundown, the clearing was glowing in that holy mix of flame and fading light. The smoke curled up toward a sky bruised with purple, and for a few hours the world made perfect sense. I leaned back with my boots out, bourbon in hand, the music humming low, and let the peace settle in. That was when I heard the voices. They came from the trail, not shouting, just laughing. A man and a woman, probably in their 30s. I saw the bob of their headlamps weaving through the trees. They walked into the clearing like they'd been invited. "Evening," the man said, stopping just shy of the firelight. "Evening," I replied, cautious but polite. He smiled, easy, friendly, practiced. The kind of smile you expect in customer service, not in the woods. "Mind if we borrow some heat for a minute?" I gestured toward the fire. "It's not mine to own." They stepped closer. She wore a bright orange beanie, cheeks flushed from the cold. He was lean, clean-shaven in a fleece with a patch I didn't recognize. They introduced themselves as Trevor and Mia, said they were camped downhill and saw the fire from the ridge. "We thought we'd stop by and say hey." Not many folks out this deep, I nodded, letting them settle on a log across from me. We made the usual small talk, trails, gear, weather. Mia teased me for camping solo. I told her a buddy was supposed to meet me but bailed last minute. That was a lie. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Trevor passed over a dented bottle of red wine and we swapped sips for bourbon. The fire cracked. The radio played on. For a while, it felt normal, pleasant even, but beneath the surface, something didn't sit right. Every now and then, I caught Trevor's eyes flicking toward my gear. Not admiring, not curious, cataloging. Mia asked oddly specific questions. Did I sleep with my knife inside the tent? Did I keep my keys on me or stashed in the truck? I answered vaguely, changed the subject, smiled too much. Eventually, I stood to grab something from my truck, mostly just to break the rhythm. When I came back, I instinctively reached for my knife on the chopping block. It was gone. Not misplaced. Not covered. Gone. It had a blaze orange handle, impossible to miss. "You lose something?" Mia asked, tilting her mug. "My knife," I said casually, scanning the fire ring. Always misplacing that thing. Trevor stood and moved some bark with his boot. "Didn't see you set it down." The way he said it felt too smooth, too ready. I didn't accuse, didn't demand, just nodded, smiled, and let it go. But my gut was screaming. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was a test. They left not long after, headlamps bouncing back into the trees. Their laughter echoed a little too loud, a little too long. I waited, didn't touch the bourbon again, doused the fire, locked the cooler, pulled the keys into my pocket, and zipped myself into the tent with the headlamp on low. I didn't sleep, not really, just closed my eyes in intervals. Every sound sharpened, every creak in the trees made my breath pause. And then, at 2:13 a.m., I'll never forget the time, I heard the zipper, not a squirrel, not wind, my tent zipper. It moved slow, just enough to open a 3-inch gap. Through it, I saw a crouched shape, a glint, my knife, in Trevor's hand. "You should have come with us," he whispered, soft, measured, like it wasn't a threat, just a fact. Behind him, Mia giggled, low and breathy. "He looks peaceful, doesn't he?" I didn't move, didn't flinch. I lay frozen, one hand inching toward my phone, praying it wouldn't light up, praying I wouldn't cough, praying he wouldn't come any closer. After what felt like a lifetime, the knife withdrew. The zipper closed. I heard whispering, then footsteps retreating into the woods. I waited until the birds began to call, until the sky bled from black to gray. When I emerged, the clearing was quiet, still. I crept toward where they said they'd camped. Nothing, no tent, no ashes, no footprints, just 2 faint ovals in the grass where someone had knelt or sat. I packed in record time, threw everything into the truck and didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. I told the ranger what happened. I expected disbelief, maybe concern. What I got was worse, a nod. "We've had other reports," he said quietly. "They move around a lot, never stick to one place. Sometimes weeks go by, sometimes just days, but yeah, you're not the first." That was it. No report filed, no questions asked. I haven't camped in that section of the Smokies since. In fact, I barely sleep in tents anymore. But every so often, late at night, I'll hear something outside my window, a scuff, a whisper, and I'll remember the way Trevor's voice sounded, barely a breath, holding my own knife. "You should have come with us." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had. Sometimes I wish I didn't. Part 2. The Man on the Log. There's something unnerving about a child's silence. Not the peaceful kind, like when they fall asleep on your chest, warm and safe, but the kind that follows a question they don't understand. When their little brows furrow and they look at you, expecting answers you're not sure you can give. That was the look Ben gave me after it all happened. A half smile, one sock inside out, a marshmallow smear on his chin, and his voice light as ever when he asked, "Was that man a ninja?" He was 8. What could I say? I wanted to tell him yes, that it was a hiker, a friendly stranger, a dream, anything but the truth. Because the truth doesn't belong in the woods, but sometimes it finds you anyway. It started a week after the events at Walker's Ridge, the unmarked clearing just off the Smokies where I'd camped alone and nearly didn't make it through the night. I hadn't told anyone, not the full version, not even my wife, Sarah. I gave her the headline, "Weird couple, bad vibes, packed early." She pressed, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was being cautious, protecting her, protecting Ben, but what I was really doing was trying to convince myself it was over. It wasn't. Ben had just turned 8, and like any kid raised in the age of glowing screens and endless scrolls, his concept of adventure came pixelated and animated. I didn't blame him. I'd worked in tech long enough to know what constant exposure did to a kid's attention span. Still, when I asked him what he wanted for his birthday and he said, "I want to camp with you, just us," I almost cried. I needed that. Time. Stillness. A reminder of who I used to be before my life became spreadsheets and emergency IT calls. Before the Smokies incident had hollowed out something I couldn't quite name. Sarah raised an eyebrow when I said we'd go to Redwood National and State Parks out in California. I told her it was a last-minute work thing, an old vendor friend, business write-off, all that. She didn't believe me, but she trusted me. I think deep down she knew I was chasing something, or running from it. We flew out 2 days later, rented a car in Eureka, and by dusk we were deep in the Avenue of the Giants, swallowed by redwood trunks so thick they felt like monuments. Ben sat in the back seat with his face glued to the window, whispering things like, "Dad, that tree is bigger than our house," while I smiled and nodded, trying not to grip the wheel too tight. It had rained earlier and everything smelled like old wood and living moss. The road narrowed until we reached a pull-off point near the Tall Trees Grove trailhead. We hiked in just under 2 miles, Ben's little pack bouncing behind him. The site I picked was nestled close to the stream, flat, dry, and just remote enough to feel earned. By nightfall, the fire was crackling, the stars were peeking out from between the branches, and Ben was working on burning his 5th marshmallow to blackened perfection. He leaned back against me on the log, sighing with the kind of contentment only kids can master. "Is it true bears are afraid of fire?" he asked. I grinned. "They're not big fans. But we hung the food high just in case. And what about bad guys?" My smile faltered. "They don't like fire either," I said, brushing his hair gently. "And they'd have to get past me first." He nodded like that settled it. The flames crackled. The river gurgled. The forest was still. By 9:30, Ben was asleep in the tent, curled in his bag, soft snores rising and falling. I stayed out by the fire, letting the bourbon warm my insides. I stared into the flames for a long time. Too long. My mind wandered to Trevor and Mia, the couple from Tennessee, the knife, the whisper, "You should have come with us." I shook the memory off like a bad dream, swore at myself for bringing it into this space. This was for Ben. This was clean. This was sacred. I doused the fire until the coals hissed and slid into the tent, zipping it tight. Ben murmured something in his sleep. I settled beside him, headlamp off, fingers curled around the base of the flashlight I'd tucked into the mesh pocket. Sleep came easier than I expected, until just before dawn. I don't know what woke me. There wasn't a sound, at least not at first. Just a feeling, like gravity had shifted slightly and the world was off-kilter. I rolled onto my back and blinked at the tent ceiling, trying to figure out what was different. Then I saw it. Through the small gap in the vestibule flap, barely visible through the screen, A figure. He was sitting on the log by the fire ring, the same log Ben and I had roasted marshmallows on just hours earlier. He wasn't rummaging through our stuff. He wasn't even moving. He was just watching. I couldn't make out his features right away. The early light was gray, not strong enough to catch details, but he was older, maybe 60s, dressed in what looked like an old wool coat. No flashlight, no pack, no hat. Hands folded in his lap like he was attending a church service. I held my breath. Ben stirred beside me. I slipped an arm across him instinctively, not to wake him, but to shield him. A useless gesture, but the only one I had. The man didn't flinch. I whispered, "Can I help you?" He smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just satisfied. Then he spoke. "I just wanted to see what kind of people sleep with their backs to the trail." That's all he said. Then he stood, brushed the back of his pants with his palms, turned, and walked uphill into the trees. Not toward the trail, not toward any marked path, just into the forest. I didn't move until the birds started calling. Ben woke up minutes later, stretching and yawning. "Is it pancake time?" He rubbed his eyes and looked toward the fire ring. "Was someone here?" "Just a hiker passing through," I said quickly. He grinned. "Like a ninja." "Something like that," I whispered. We ate oatmeal, packed slowly. I double-checked everything. Nothing was missing. The fire ring was undisturbed, but the log, the one he sat on, it had been brushed clean of ash, as if someone had wiped it. When we left, I angled the tent door differently before collapsing it, turned it to face the trail. It felt small, ridiculous maybe, but it mattered. Back home, Sarah laughed at Ben's ninja story. I let her. He'd remember marshmallows and stars. I'd remember the man who walked out of the woods and gave me no reason, no threat, just a message, one that felt older than the trees themselves. Don't forget where you are, don't forget who's watching, and never, ever turn your back to the trail. Part 3. Shadows on the Trail. There's a certain kind of silence in the Pacific Northwest that doesn't feel peaceful. It's thick, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin and waits for you to make the first move. And when you do, it listens. That's what I remember most about the Olympic National Park. Not the beauty, though it was stunning. Not the solitude, though I was completely alone, but the way the forest felt like it had ears. I wasn't supposed to be out there that long. It was supposed to be 3 days, 4 max, a solo reset, a breath of fresh air between projects. My name's Claire, 37, a UI designer by trade, hiker by passion, and if you asked anyone who knows me, they'd say I'm the most competent person they've ever met. Maybe that's why I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I'd planned the route in advance. Park at the fork by Lake Crescent, hike up toward Boulder Creek Campground, then veer off into one of the lesser-used ridgelines and loop back around. No cell service, no distractions, just me and the trail. At least, that's how it started. The first 2 days were textbook perfect. I set camp near a rocky overlook the first night, watched the mist roll through the treetops, wrote in my trail journal, and fell asleep to the sound of water burbling somewhere below. The second day, I made great time, spotted 2 black-tailed deer, and even stumbled on a tiny patch of chanterelle mushrooms near the base of a cedar. Left them, of course. I wasn't stupid. Around mid-afternoon, as I followed a sloping trail cut between ferns and moss-heavy branches, I saw them. 3 figures, maybe 70 feet ahead. They moved in unison, 2 men, 1 woman, each with packs, dressed like hikers. But there was something off even from that distance. Not their pace or posture exactly, more like their presence. They didn't look around, didn't talk, didn't pause to admire the view. Just walked. I slowed, assuming I'd eventually catch up and we'd exchange the standard trailhead hellos. But as I got closer, they drifted to the right and stepped off the main trail onto a narrow flat patch, tucked just behind a thick tree cluster. No tents, no firewood, just packs down and a quiet sort of stillness. I waved politely. None of them waved back. The woman turned slightly, enough to let me know they'd seen me, but then turned away again like I wasn't worth acknowledging. I kept walking, told myself it didn't matter. Some people just prefer privacy. Not everyone wants to chat. Not everyone wants to be noticed. But something in me didn't settle. That night, I set up camp on a bluff with a view of the valley. Not the coziest spot, but it gave me what I wanted: visibility. I cooked dinner, freeze-dried pasta, still gross, filtered water from a nearby stream, and journaled about the trio. I wrote, "Passed 3 hikers today." Something felt weird. No eye contact, no camp setup, not even a fire. Stealth campers, maybe? But why stay that close to the trail? I didn't have an answer. I zipped into my tent early, exhausted but not tired. The wind rustled gently through the trees. An owl called in the distance, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about how close those 3 had camped, within earshot, just sitting in the dark. But the second night was worse. I'd moved maybe 5 miles farther, deeper into the ridgeline, where the trail started to fade into overgrown switchbacks. There were no other hikers now. No sign of camps, no scattered trash, not even boot prints. But around dusk, just as I'd finished stacking my gear for the night, I felt it again. Presence. Not sound, not movement. Just the sensation of being observed. I turned a slow circle. Nothing but trees. Nothing but fading light and the hush of wind through pine. I built a small fire, ate slowly, forced myself to go through the motions. My rational brain told me I was being paranoid, that nothing had happened, that I'd hiked dozens of trails alone, and this was no different. But it was different. That night I slept in half-dreams, the kind where you wake every hour and swear something changed. A branch cracked, a whisper floated, the air shifted. I started planning my exit the moment I saw sunlight. The next morning, I packed up fast, real fast, skipped breakfast, cinched straps, tightened my laces like I was preparing for a sprint. As I stood to lift my pack, movement flickered in the corner of my vision. I turned. They were there, the 3 hikers, standing 50 feet from my sight. Same formation, woman in the middle, 2 men flanking, no tents, no fire, no gear unpacked, just watching. I didn't wave this time, I didn't speak. I shouldered my pack and started walking. They didn't follow, not right away. And the trail curved back toward the old creek trail that would lead me to the car in maybe 5 or 6 hours. I kept a strong pace, not running but pushing. That kind of pace you take when your body wants to run, but your mind says, don't panic. But the sound behind me came anyway. Footsteps, steady, soft, distant. I glanced over my shoulder and caught the blur of movement through the trees. I picked up speed. The trail forked at the old switchback ridge. Left was wider, more maintained, straight toward the original trailhead. Right was narrow, brush-choked, but I remembered from my map study. It curved hard, dipped through a dry creek bed, and met the road again a few miles north. I didn't think. I cut right. Branches snapped, ferns clawed. I ducked and wove through the underbrush, heart pounding, and then I dropped, a full body roll down the creek bank, slammed into gravel, bit my tongue, rolled to my knees and scrambled behind a rotted log. Then I waited, breath held, pack still on, knife in hand. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and then footsteps, soft, measured, at the fork above. A shape paused. Someone turned their head toward the brush I was hiding behind. I didn't move. My heart beat so loud I was sure they'd hear it. But they didn't come closer, didn't step off trail. They just turned back and kept walking, back along the wider trail. I stayed down for 30 more minutes, maybe longer. When I finally got up, my legs were shaking, but I didn't stop. I made it to the road around 4 hours later, bruised, scraped, dehydrated. My car was still there, so were my keys, hidden under the bumper magnet box, untouched. I drove 20 miles before I allowed myself to breathe, 30 before I cried. I reported it to a ranger. He listened, didn't take notes, said things like, probably just some odd folks out for a minimalist hike, and people get spooked all the time out there. But something in his face said he didn't believe his own words. As I turned to leave, he said, "You said 3 people." "Yeah," I replied, "2 men." One woman didn't speak. He nodded slowly. "We've had a few similar mentions. Nothing official, no incidents. But next time you hike solo, just call it in before and after." He never looked me in the eye. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the couch for hours without turning the lights on. I kept thinking about their silence, the way they stood, the precision, no wasted movement, no curiosity, no fear. I thought about how they never spoke, how they never responded, how they just watched, and how they knew exactly where I was when I tried to hide. A still hike, but not alone anymore. Not because I'm scared, because I understand now. The wilderness doesn't need monsters to be dangerous. Sometimes it just needs people who forgot how to be human. And sometimes you don't disappear because you got lost. You disappear because someone else found you first. Part 4. The Zipper Test. There's a moment right before a tent zipper opens, when time stops. It's not the sound itself, not the metallic rasp of teeth separating. It's the implication. That thin nylon wall, that barrier between inside and outside, is more fragile than you think. And once someone touches it from the other side, you're not camping anymore. You're surviving. The Friday I left for Pisgah National Forest, the sky was a faded blue. I'd been staring at spreadsheets for 3 weeks straight, coordinating an over-budget rollout for a client that didn't know what they wanted. I needed out. I wasn't aiming for adventure, just space, quiet, a chair, a fire, a paperback I'd pretend to read. I had no idea what had happened to Claire out in Olympic, or what Levi had seen in the Redwoods, or what near-miss Jack had survived in the Smokies. Not yet. Back then, all I knew was that I wanted to spend 2 nights alone in the woods with a cooler full of real food and no Slack notifications. I chose a spot about 10 miles east of Asheville. Not too remote, not too crowded. The perfect balance. A gravel road took me up into the pines, winding like a broken spine into the forest, until I reached the little pullout I'd marked on my map. No signs, no reservations, just flat earth, a blackened fire ring, and the hush of wilderness. I parked the car, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Pine, dry bark, a hint of loam and wind. I exhaled. I was home. Camp setup took less than 30 minutes. I'd done it 100 times. Stake the tent, check the lines, arrange the cooler and stove on the tailgate, tuck the food bag high in the trees. The shadows stretched long by the time I finished eating the rice and chicken I'd packed in foil, still warm from the drive. I didn't bother with a fire. Not yet. Just sat in my camp chair, sipping black coffee from a steel mug, listening to the sounds shift, birds giving way to bugs, the sigh of wind through the canopy, the creak of old branches. I was thinking about nothing and everything at once when the headlights broke through the trees. A truck, dark red, older model, slowed as it approached, then came to a stop right beside my sight. 2 men climbed out, maybe mid-30s, baseball caps, hoodies. One tall and lean, the other shorter, stockier. Their jeans were dusty. Their boots looked like they'd been walking through brush. I stood up automatically. "Evening," I called out. "Evening," the tall one echoed. His voice was polite, almost warm, but the look in his eyes wasn't. "This is our spot," he said. I blinked. "Your spot?" He nodded. "We use it most weekends. You're in it." I gestured to my setup. Tent staked, cooler out, gear spread. "I can pack up if you want. Just give me 10 minutes. The short one chuckled. "Nah, you're fine. Stay, no problem." But the way he said it, it wasn't generosity, it was invitation, and it made my stomach twist. "You sure?" I asked. "Positive," the tall one said. Then after a pause, "You gonna make a fire?" I hesitated. "Yeah, in a bit." They nodded in sync, turned, and walked back to the truck. But instead of leaving, they pulled 50 feet down the road and stopped again, just far enough to be out of sight, but close enough that I could still see their outline through the trees. No headlights, no engine, just there. I tried not to panic. Maybe they were locals. Maybe they did use this site regularly. Maybe they were just annoyed that I beat them to it. I forced myself to build a fire. Better to have light. Better to feel grounded. I fed it slowly, the flames licking up as dusk gave way to night. I sat with my back to the car, facing the woods, pretending the fire was enough to shield me. But it wasn't, because the truck never left, and neither did they. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted. I doused the fire, zipped the tent shut, crawled inside, and tucked the keys and phone into the corner pocket of my sleeping bag. A habit, not paranoia. At least, that's what I used to think. Sleep came in fragments. A few minutes here, a half hour there. Every rustle of the wind sounded heavier than it should. I kept checking the time. Midnight, 12:17, 1:05. Then whispers, not loud, not angry, just talking. Two voices, low, close. I froze. They moved around the tent, slow, almost curious, like they were inspecting it, the kind of steps you take when you don't want to wake someone or when you want to see if they are awake. Then came the zipper, soft, steady, intentional. I didn't think. I grabbed my phone in one hand and with the other yanked the opposite zipper open. The flap spilled cold air as I shoved through and ran. Barefoot, sharp rocks and sticks biting into my soles. I didn't look back. Branches slapped my face. My breath tore through me. I didn't stop until I dove behind a fallen log, crouched low and hugged the phone to my chest to keep it from lighting up. Back at camp, the whispers stopped. Then a shuffle. Then silence. I waited. An hour. Maybe more. The woods slowly came back to life. Bugs, leaves, the occasional distant owl. And still, I waited. When gray light finally began to filter through the trees, I picked my way back. Careful, cautious, ready to run again. The site looked untouched. Tent half unzipped. Chair knocked over. Cooler closed. The truck was gone. I didn't pack. I scooped what I could into the car, left the chair, left the tarp, and shoved the half-collapsed tent into the hatch. Gravel spat under my tires as I tore down the road, heart hammering, blood singing. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. At a gas station outside of Brevard, I sat in the car with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel, shaking. The zipper sound played on loop in my head. Metal teeth, parting in the dark, with hands that didn't belong there. A week later, I went back with a friend to get what I left behind. The forest looked different in daylight, calmer, smaller. The spot was still there. Fire ring, flat clearing, but the cooler had been moved, set neatly beside a tree, contents gone, chair gone too. I told the ranger the short version. He nodded slowly. "Next time," he said, "call us. Even if you're not sure," that was all. And I don't camp the same anymore. I still go. I still need it. But I listen differently now. I trust my gut. I keep the keys on me, not in the tent. I don't ignore the voice that says, leave, because sometimes generosity isn't kindness. Sometimes it's a test, and the sound of a zipper at midnight is not a test I ever want again. Part 5. The Edge of the Light. I turned 39 the same week I left the last office job I'll ever have. 12 years behind a desk had worn down everything but the part of me that wanted to run. Not from life, exactly, but from the dull hum of artificial light and digital noise. I needed something older than deadlines, something that couldn't be solved with a password reset or a forced smile in a Zoom window. So I did what I've always done when I'm on the edge. I packed a bag, filled the tank, and drove out into the woods. Solo. I had no idea that the place I chose, Mount Rogers National Recreation Area, nestled near the Virginia-North Carolina border, would be the last place I ever camped alone, or that it would finally connect all the strange pieces I'd tried to ignore for months. The drive-in was long but easy. The Blue Ridge Highway carved its way past meadows and rolling hills, the trees just starting to surrender to fall. I parked at a gravel pull-off that looked like no one had touched it in days. No signs, no people. Just the faint scrape of wind through trees that hadn't seen a chainsaw in a decade. I followed a forgotten trail past weather-worn blazes, deeper and deeper into a part of the woods that looked older than anything I'd ever hiked through. Gnarled roots, stone outcroppings like fossilized waves, trees that leaned like they were eavesdropping. I found my spot by a stream, flat earth, natural windbreak, enough dry wood for a small fire, and most importantly, silence. Real silence, not the kind that buzzes with car engines miles away or airplanes overhead. This was thick, present silence, the kind that made you feel small, like a guest, like the forest was letting you stay, but only because it hadn't decided otherwise. I pitched my tent with the door facing the creek, cooked instant noodles on my jet boil, and watched the sun set in slanted amber through the canopy. I told myself this trip would be different. No work, no distractions, just rest. But rest never came. At 2:37 a.m., I sat bolt upright in my tent. No dream, no sound, just alert. The fire outside had collapsed into glowing coals, a soft orange pulse flickering against the thin tent wall. Then came the footsteps. Not running, not staggering, just placed. Careful, slow, measured. Someone, something, was circling the campsite. Not brushing leaves or snapping twigs like a curious animal. These were human steps, too light to be careless, too soft to be friendly. I lay frozen in my bag, my hand finding the flashlight tucked under my jacket. The steps continued around and around, then stopped. I eased the zipper of the tent a few inches, through the narrow gap, past the smudge of the fly sheet and the dying firelight. I saw him, standing just beyond the circle of fire, not in it, not out of it, exactly at the edge of the light. Still, watching. He wasn't large, average build, clothes too dark to distinguish, but he didn't move, didn't speak. He just waited. I didn't blink, didn't dare breathe too loud. After what felt like a lifetime, he stepped backward. One step, then another, then the darkness swallowed him whole. I didn't sleep again. When the sun finally began to cut through the mist, I stepped outside. The campsite looked exactly as I left it. Food bag untouched, fire ring cold, water pot still leaning against a rock. But when I walked to the spot where the man had stood, I saw it. A faint scuff in the pine needles, and next to it, a footprint. Bare, human, and not mine. I packed fast, didn't fold the tent, didn't shake out the sleeping pad, just shoved everything into my pack and made 2 trips to the car, heart pounding like a war drum the whole way. But it wasn't until I got back to the gravel pull-off that I realized there was another car, One I hadn't noticed before, an old red pickup, no plates, parked just far enough into the trees to blend in. Empty, no trash, no wrappers, no sign anyone had been there, except a single muddy handprint on the back window, not smeared, pressed, like someone had been standing there, watching. I drove into town and left a note in the ranger station's trail box. Strange encounter at stream near Rogers Loop. Man stood at edge of firelight, no gear, no flashlight. Disappeared into woods. I left my number. I never got a call. Weeks passed, but the feeling didn't. It stuck with me like sap on skin. I couldn't wash it off. Every night I thought I heard the fire crackling. Every shadow outside my apartment felt just a little too still. Every whisper of wind sounded like breath. And then things started connecting. It was Jack who called first. We'd met on a gear forum years back and done a few joint hikes before life took over. He asked me if I'd been in the Smokies recently. October, I said. Did anything weird happen? That was all it took. I told him everything. He listened. Then he said, I think I met them too. Couple, too friendly. Took my knife, tried to get me to follow them. A beat of silence. I didn't, he added, and I don't think they liked that. Then Levi reached out. He'd seen someone in the Redwoods, a man, just sitting there at dawn. Said something cryptic, then walked into the forest like a ghost. Claire had her own story from the Olympics. A trio, silent, watchful, followed her for hours. None of us had told each other before, because none of us wanted to believe we'd seen something we couldn't explain. But we had. All of us. Different parks, different months, same pattern, same feeling. I started to dig. Old trail logs, disappearance reports, online forums, Reddit threads, comments on old ranger station blog posts. Most of it was nonsense. Bigfoot sightings, forest hallucinations, backcountry paranoia. But every once in a while there'd be a detail that stood out. He didn't speak, just stood there, watching the tent. 3 people, no lights, no fire. They camped near us but never made a sound. Someone opened our zipper. We ran. Nothing stolen, just moved, scattered stories, whispered accounts, all different but too similar, and always the woods. The last thing I found was a name, not a person, a ranger station code name. Echo Loop. It wasn't on any public trail map, but according to a buried ranger incident report from 2019, Echo Loop was a nickname given to a cluster of backcountry trails across state lines. Areas known for unregulated clearings, disappearing hikers, and encounters too vague to report officially. They couldn't prove anything, couldn't explain it, so they made a folder, marked it Echo, and moved on. We started calling each other more often, the 4 of us, Jack, Levi, Claire, and me. We'd meet up when we could, share details, compare notes, a kind of quiet support group for people who'd seen something they weren't supposed to survive. At first, we thought it was over, that we were lucky, that whatever those things were, people, predators, cult, something else, had moved on. But last week, Jack's wife got a knock on their door. She said it was a woman, polite, smiling, asked if Jack was home, said they met on the trail a while back and wanted to say thank you. She wore an orange beanie and carried a knife with a bright orange handle. Jack never owned one like that. But I did. We don't think it's over, and maybe it never was. Maybe these aren't coincidences. Maybe it's not about the park, or the season, or the gear you carry. Maybe it's about proximity, to fear, to instinct, to the edge of the light. Because whoever, whatever they are, they don't need to chase you. They just need you to stay still long enough, to stand with your back to the trail, to look away from the tree line, to believe that the fire is enough. If you ever camp alone, remember this. Never sleep with your zipper unlocked. Never dismiss a stranger in the woods. And if you hear someone step just beyond the firelight, not in it, not out of it, but right on the edge, don't speak, don't move, and above all, don't invite them in.